5 ancient discoveries that shouldn't exist, but do. 1. The echo vaults of Tibet, temples that whisper back. In the high altitudes of the Himalayas, where winds cut across jagged peaks and silence is often the loudest presence, there are places carved into the living rock that do not belong to any ordinary history. The locals call them the chambers that speak. To the outside eye, they look like empty stone vaults, rough-hewn tunnels, and alcoves hollowed from the mountain itself. Yet the moment one steps inside, the air seems to bend, the walls seem to vibrate, and every sound, no matter how small, is returned in ways that defy common logic. Whispers return as voices, chants return as entire choruses, and footsteps echo back with rhythms that do not match the pace of the traveler. Something about these chambers is wrong, or, perhaps, something about them is designed. For centuries, these vaults were known only to a handful of monastic communities. Pilgrims would sometimes be led inside for initiations, always blindfolded, always forbidden from describing what they heard within. Stories passed quietly from monk to monk claimed that the chambers were not made by human hands at all, but discovered, already formed, as though the mountains themselves had been hollowed out with an intention that preceded recorded history. Modern archaeologists, when pressed, offer half explanations: natural formations, unusual acoustics, coincidences of geology. Yet the monks insist there is no coincidence in the way certain sounds are answered, no randomness in the way chants build upon themselves until the chamber seems filled with unseen voices. The vaults are not caves, they say they are instruments. During the late 20th century, a small team of European researchers managed to gain unofficial access to one of the lesser-known chambers. What they experienced was never formally published, but fragments of their notes survived in private letters. One researcher described how a single strike of a tuning fork reverberated for nearly 5 minutes, each pulse splitting into overtones that should not exist in stone. Another swore that, when he whispered a line from the Rig Veda into the chamber, the reply came back not as his own voice, but in a tone lower, resonant, almost inhuman. The team left quickly, unsettled, refusing to return. Their notes vanished into archives that have never been opened to the public. Later, in the early 2000s, a geophysicist attempted a more rigorous investigation, bringing vibration sensors and electromagnetic monitors into one of the smaller open chambers. For 2 weeks he recorded data, but what emerged from the walls was not mere sound. At random intervals, the rock itself emitted frequencies aligned with the natural rhythms of the human brain. Theta waves, the same measured during dreams and deep states of meditation. The data suggested that the vaults were not simply reflecting noise, but generating signals. Signals designed to interact with consciousness itself. The geophysicist published his findings briefly online before retracting them, claiming errors in his equipment. But in interviews years later, he admitted privately that he had not retracted because of faulty science. He had retracted because of pressure and because of fear. Local legends hold an even darker element. It is said that some of the vaults remain sealed not due to collapse or decay, but by deliberate choice. In the villages nearest to the sites, there are whispered accounts of nights when the sealed chambers hum on their own, long after the monks have retired. No human enters, yet chants emerge, layered and distant, in languages no scholar has ever identified. Some villagers insist they have heard these sounds drift across the mountains during full moons, echoing faintly like a forgotten choir carried on the wind. Others say that once, long ago, the chambers were opened too widely, and what came out was not merely sound, but presence. Could it be possible that these vaults are ancient devices, built with an understanding of resonance that exceeds even modern acoustics? Could their purpose have been to alter the human mind, to simulate divine encounters, or to open channels of communication not between people, but between dimensions of thought itself? Archaeology avoids the question entirely. There are no excavation permits, no major research programs, no conferences dedicated to these anomalies. They remain, officially, as odd natural formations of no real significance. And yet, anyone who has stood within them carries a different truth. The walls are not silent, the air is not still. The mountain is listening. There is one final story, told in hushed tones by a former pilgrim who claimed to have experienced the initiation ritual decades ago. Blindfolded, led into the chamber by monks, he was instructed to sit in the darkness and listen. At first he heard only his own breath, then the drip of water, then his own whispered mantras. But after time passed, the chamber began to answer, not as echo, but as dialogue. He swore that questions formed in his mind before he spoke them aloud, and the vault replied in tones that bypassed the ear and went straight into the center of his chest. When he left, he said, his life had changed. He never returned. Not because the experience was false, but because it was too real. He described it as standing in the presence of something older than language, older than humanity, and far more interested in us than we could ever understand. If these chambers are natural, they are the strangest natural formations in existence. If they are man-made, they represent a science of sound and mind that our age has yet to rediscover. And if they are neither, then perhaps they are something else entirely, a gateway, a receiver, an ancient signal left behind in the bones of the earth, still waiting to be answered. Which leaves us with a final, haunting possibility. Maybe we are not the ones listening. Maybe we are the ones being heard. 2. The glitch in the sand. Fossils that shouldn't exist. The desert is often described as lifeless. Yet deserts are not empty at all. They are archives. Beneath shifting dunes and cracked stone, the Sahara hides not just sand, but the memory of ages. Once, long before it was a sea of heat and silence, this land was green. Rivers cut through valleys, herds roamed, and perhaps civilizations thrived. Today, all that remains of that forgotten time are fragments, fossils, bones, shadows of life preserved in stone. But in certain places, those fossils tell a story that should not exist. In the late 20th century, a team of North African researchers came across what they first thought were the remnants of ancient animal tracks hardened into stone. At closer inspection, their shock grew. Among them were prints that looked unmistakably human. 5 toes, arch, heel, stride. Normal in every way except for one detail. They were embedded in geological layers dated at more than 100 million years old. To accept that age would be to accept a paradox. Humanity, according to all official models, did not exist then. Our ancestors were not even imagined in the long evolutionary chain. Yet the footprints remained, etched into time, their very presence a contradiction. The site was quietly sealed. The prints were called ambiguous erosions. The matter was closed. But fragments of photographs and field notes leaked years later, circulating among independent researchers who noticed details no natural erosion could produce: symmetry, depth, pressure marks consistent with living steps. The evidence suggested not coincidence, but deliberate weight pressing into once soft ground. The fossils, if genuine, are not just anomalous. They are impossible. This was not an isolated case. In another corner of the Sahara, during oil prospecting in the 1980s, core samples brought to the surface carried within them tools of chipped stone buried beside the fossilized remains of creatures from the Cretaceous period. Simple hammers, shards shaped for cutting. Nothing advanced, yet utterly undeniable in their human design. Once more, the discovery was dismissed as contamination. Tools had fallen into the core shafts. The workers had made errors. But those who handled the samples firsthand swore there was no mistake. The tools had rested undisturbed in rock untouched for tens of millions of years. Their testimonies went ignored, their careers dissolved, and the fossils returned to the silence of the desert. Perhaps the most disturbing clue of all came not from the ground, but from the sky. A French cartographer, experimenting with early private satellite imaging, scanned a section of the Western Sahara not far from one of the disputed fossil sites. What appeared on his screen froze him. Beneath the sand stretched a vast pattern, geometric, ordered, unmistakably artificial. It resembled a grid, almost like the blueprint of a buried city, aligned with perfect north-south orientation. The cartographer shared the images on his small website. Within days, the files disappeared. His site was shut down. In his last entry before vanishing from public view, he wrote a single line: "The timeline is broken. If these accounts are true, then history as we know it is a mask." The implication is staggering. Humanity, or something like humanity, may have walked the earth long before our accepted timeline allows. Entire epochs earlier, leaving behind traces that emerge only when the desert decides to release them. Could it be that civilizations rise not once, but many times, each erased by catastrophe, each remembered only in fragments? Could we be the latest version of a story written and rewritten across geological ages? Mainstream science rejects such thoughts, for to accept them would demand rewriting every textbook, reevaluating every assumption of human progress. It is easier to bury anomalies beneath labels of coincidence and error. Yet the desert does not lie, the desert preserves. And every so often, it offers us a glimpse into something we are not ready to accept. Imagine what else lies beneath those endless dunes. Structures swallowed by sandstorms, records of lives erased by time, evidence of a cycle repeating far longer than our brief civilizations allow us to perceive. If the Sahara is a graveyard, it may not be only for animals and plants. It may be a graveyard of forgotten worlds, worlds where humanity walked among creatures we believe extinct for millions of years. Worlds erased not by nature alone, but perhaps by intention. If that is the case, then archaeology's greatest challenge is not simply to uncover the truth. It is to overcome the silence that follows every discovery, too dangerous to fit the narrative. Because silence, in this case, is not ignorance. Silence is a decision, and the desert, patient as always, is waiting for us to listen again. Until then, the footprints remain, the tools remain, the grid beneath the sand remains, fragments of a past that refuses to vanish, evidence of a glitch in the story of time itself, and perhaps a warning that the story we tell ourselves about origins, progress, and destiny has never been ours to write. 3. The 11 Walls of Asuka, Messages from the Unbuilt World. In the quiet valleys of Nara Prefecture, Japan, lies a landscape that feels almost misplaced in time. The village of Asuka is known for its strange megaliths, enormous stones shaped into forms that have baffled archaeologists for decades. Some resemble turtles, others boats, other shapes so abstract they defy classification. But beyond the odd sculptures, there is something far more unsettling, and far less known outside of small circles of researchers. 11 walls of stone, each carved with intricate markings, each standing in silent defiance of interpretation. They are called, by those who study them, the 11 Walls of Asuka. To a casual visitor, the walls seem like weathered relics, remnants of some forgotten construction project left unfinished, yet their carvings tell another story. Lines cut deep into the rock, flowing in patterns that do not match any known language, script, or symbolic system. They are too precise to be random scratches, too deliberate to be dismissed as decoration. Archaeologists who cannot explain them call them ornamental, a word that means nothing, a placeholder for what cannot be understood. But for others, especially those who have studied them closely at dawn and dusk, the markings appear to change when light strikes at certain angles. Shadows extend, distort, and overlap in ways that create new images that cannot be seen at midday. It is as though the walls were designed to speak only when the sun chooses to reveal their message. In 2015, a Japanese physicist attempted to test this idea. Using photometric sensors, he recorded the play of sunlight across the carvings during the summer solstice. What he captured was extraordinary. At the exact moment the sun aligned with a nearby ridge. The shadows cast by the carvings merged into a geometric figure that did not exist on the stone itself. For a brief minute, a pattern resembling a perfect spiral appeared, spinning outward as the light shifted. Then it vanished. The physicist suggested this was intentional and ancient form of solar coding. His findings were dismissed. The site was reclassified as cultural landscape with no inscriptions of significance. But the recordings still circulate among private researchers, haunting evidence that the walls may not be static at all, but dynamic devices interacting with the movements of the heavens. Local folklore adds yet another dimension. Oral traditions speak of a time when Asuka was not a village but a threshold. They tell of beings who did not speak with mouths but with light, whose messages were not written on paper but carved into stone, activated by the sun. Elders called the carvings the alphabet of the unbuilt world, a code meant to bridge the visible and the invisible. According to these tales, only those who knew when and how to look could read what was stored in the walls. The rest would see nothing but meaningless scratches. Such stories are dismissed as myths, yet they echo uncomfortably with what modern sensors have recorded. There is also the matter of what lies beneath. High-frequency LiDAR surveys conducted by an independent Japanese team revealed strange anomalies under 3 of the wall's perfectly rectangular voids, aligned with the carvings above. To anyone else, they would suggest chambers or tunnels. Yet excavation permits have never been granted. Officials cite cultural preservation, claiming digging could damage the stones. Privately, one official was reported to have said, "We were told not to disturb them." Who gave that order, and why, has never been explained. Theories swirl, each more unsettling than the last. Some believe the walls are remnants of a forgotten civilization whose language and science have been erased. Others argue they are not remnants at all, but mechanisms left incomplete, like parts of a machine we cannot yet recognize. A smaller group suggests something more radical, that the walls were not meant for people of the past, but for us. Messages carved not backward in time, but forward, waiting to be unlocked when humanity reached a point where it could understand. The symbolism of 11 walls is itself a mystery. 11, a number often associated with transition, threshold, and imbalance between symmetry and chaos. Why not 10? Why not 12? Why create just enough to suggest a system, but never enough to reveal the full pattern? Some researchers argue that the missing element is not the 12th wall, but the observer, that the carvings are not complete until a human stands before them, watching the light shift, allowing the shadow to bridge stone and perception. In that sense, the message is not in the stone, nor in the light, but in the mind of the one who sees. Whatever their purpose, the 11 walls of Asuka refuse to conform to archaeological convenience. They stand, silent but insistent, daring us to look deeper. They challenge the idea that history is linear, that language has a single origin, that time moves only in one direction. Perhaps they are fragments of a memory left behind not by humans, but by something else, something that understood time not as a line, but as a loop. Perhaps they are warnings, or invitations, or records meant for eyes that have yet to be born. When we stand before them, we are forced to ask the most haunting question of all. What if these walls were never meant to be part of a city, never part of a settlement, never designed for shelter or defense? What if the entire site of Asuka is not a place for the living, but a device for the future? A monument that has been waiting patiently, silently, until the moment someone realizes it was never just stone. It was always a message, and the message is not yet complete. 4. The Watchers beneath Lake Baikal. Signals from the deep. Lake Baikal is unlike any other body of water on Earth. It stretches for hundreds of miles across Siberia, its depths plunging farther than any other lake known to man. Older than the Himalayas, older even than the oceans in their present form, Baikal is a rift in the planet's crust, a wound filled with water so pure that it produces its own kind of silence. But the silence of Baikal is not empty. Beneath its surface, In the cold dark where sunlight cannot reach, something has been moving. Something that should not exist, something that has been watching. In the late years of the Soviet Union, military expeditions were sent beneath Baikal's surface to conduct research and secret tests. Naval divers, trained for extreme conditions, were ordered to map sections of the lake, to experiment with sonar, to test equipment meant for deep-sea operations. What they encountered defied training, science, and reason. Declassified fragments of Soviet reports speak of encounters with beings described as tall, human-like, and yet not human at all. They wore no visible gear, no helmets, no oxygen tanks, and yet they moved freely at depths where ordinary lungs would collapse within seconds. Their bodies were said to shimmer with a silvery film, not clothing exactly, but something that functioned like skin. The divers, shocked and terrified, attempted to capture one of these figures with nets. What followed was violence beyond understanding. A pressure wave exploded outward, throwing the divers to the surface. Some never returned. Official records list accidents, but survivors whispered of an encounter with the impossible. After that mission, new protocols were imposed. Diving at extreme depths without clearance was banned. Research into the deepest trenches of Baikal slowed, then stopped. The story faded into rumor, yet the accounts refused to die. Over the decades, civilian expeditions have reported malfunctions at certain depths. Submersibles lose power, instruments fail. Cameras record nothing but static until they are raised again. Divers describe sensations of being observed, of shapes moving just beyond the reach of light. And in the most chilling cases, they claim to have heard low vibrations reverberating through the water, like the steady pulse of a distant engine. When amplified, these sounds reveal patterns regular, rhythmic, deliberate. Not noise, signals. Local Buryat traditions are filled with legends of the lake. They call it the Sea of Spirits, a place where beings older than humanity rest in the deep. They tell of watchers who rise only in times of crisis, earthquakes, wars, the destruction of balance. According to the elders, Baikal is not just water, but a mirror, reflecting humanity back upon itself. The watchers, they say, do not intervene to save or destroy, but to observe, to record, to wait. These tales were dismissed as folklore for centuries. But when Soviet reports leaked in the 1990s, describing humanoid entities and unexplained deaths, the legends began to sound less like stories and more like warnings. In recent years, independent sonar teams have scanned the lake, hoping to find answers. What they discovered was stranger still. Deep beneath the sediment floor, far below where life should be possible, pulses of sound emerge at regular intervals. The frequencies align with no known geological process. They are too ordered, too consistent. When fed into audio software and stretched across time, the pulses form something almost like a heartbeat, a living rhythm, or perhaps a beacon. Some believe it is a natural phenomenon. Others insist it is communication, a signal meant to be received not by machines, but by consciousness itself. Western researchers who attempted dives into Baikal have reported interference not just from the environment, but from authorities. Permits revoked at the last minute, equipment sabotaged or stolen. In one case, an entire dataset vanished from university archives within days of being uploaded. The official reason, data corruption, but the team leader swore the files were intact. He claimed the data revealed anomalies beneath the lake floor that suggested vast hollow spaces, perhaps caverns or even structures. His warnings were ignored. He left academia soon after. His colleagues refused to speak of him. If Baikal truly hides watchers beneath its depths, then who are they? Survivors of an ancient civilization driven below the surface during some cataclysm. Entities not of this earth, using the planet's oldest lake as a base of observation. Or perhaps something even stranger, beings native to the earth but born in conditions so different from ours that they evolved in secrecy. Hidden beneath water, too deep for us to reach. Whatever they are, their presence raises questions archaeology cannot begin to touch. Because if they exist, they are not relics of the past. They are here now, watching. The thought is unsettling. Archaeology deals with what is buried, what is gone, what is dead. But Lake Baikal forces us to confront the possibility that not all mysteries are ancient, and not all secrets are silent. Some are alive, waiting beneath the surface, humming their signals into the dark. And if the watchers truly rise only during times of imbalance, then perhaps their growing presence is not a coincidence. Perhaps the world above the lake is already spiraling toward another cycle of collapse. Perhaps the watchers are not warning us at all. Perhaps they are counting down. 5. The silence of history. What we were never meant to remember. Finally, everything we have uncovered, the vaults that whisper, the fossils that shatter chronology, the walls that speak in shadows, the watchers beneath the waters, leads us to a single, unnerving realization. The greatest mystery in archaeology is not what we find, but what we are prevented from remembering. The past is not merely incomplete, it has been shaped, curated, and silenced. Somewhere between discovery and narrative, evidence is erased, anomalies vanish, and inconvenient truths dissolve into rumor. What remains is a version of history carefully assembled, a story we are taught to believe. But silence has fingerprints, and when we examine these fingerprints closely, the outline of a deliberate hand begins to appear. Consider how discoveries vanish from the record. A footprint too old, a fossil in the wrong layer, a carving with no language, a signal with no explanation. Official channels declare mistakes, contamination, natural coincidence. Careers are destroyed, expeditions cut short, permits revoked. Those who insist on questioning are cast as conspiracists, their reputations dismantled until their voices carry no weight. This is not how science behaves. This is how guardians behave, protectors not of truth, but of a narrative, which forces us to ask, what is being protected? Who benefits from a history that ends neatly at the dawn of civilization, with no echoes of advanced worlds before it? Why does our official timeline begin so recently, when the Earth has turned for billions of years? There are 3 possibilities. The first is the most comforting, that we are mistaken, that these anomalies are errors of perception, and history is exactly as we believe. The second is more troubling, that humanity has risen and fallen many times, civilizations erased by cataclysm, leaving only fragments too strange to be acknowledged. The third is the most haunting of all, that the silence itself is intentional, maintained not only by human institutions, but by forces beyond us watchers who ensure that certain knowledge never reaches the surface. Whichever possibility is true, the result is the same. We live in a story built on missing chapters, and the weight of what is missing may be greater than the story itself. The silence of history is not passive. It is active. It resists our attempts to question it. Sites are sealed. Artifacts disappear. Archives close. Entire expeditions are forgotten. Yet despite these efforts, cracks appear. Echoes escape. Whispers return. Fossils surface. Shadows move. Signals hum. The truth cannot be buried forever. It seeps through, like water rising through the smallest fissures in stone, and when it emerges, even in fragments, it shakes us to our core, because it reminds us that what we call civilization is not the first, and likely not the last. We are not the authors of history, we are only its latest subjects. What if the vaults of Tibet are not chambers of meditation, but receivers tuned to voices older than language? What if the fossils in the Sahara aren't mistakes, but records of humanity's forgotten cycles? What if the walls of Asuka are not ruins, but instructions, waiting to be read when the right eyes appear? And what if the watchers in Baikal are invaders, but witnesses, keeping track of each rise and fall, each reset of the human story? If these questions make us uneasy, it is because, deep down, we suspect the answers, we suspect that history is far older, far stranger, and far more deliberate than anything we were ever taught to believe. Imagine, for a moment, that the silence is lifted. Imagine that every anomaly is revealed, every forbidden fragment restored, every erased discovery acknowledged. Our understanding of humanity would not simply change. It would collapse. Religions would falter. Governments would lose authority. Science itself would be forced to admit that it had been guarding dogma as carefully as faith. And perhaps that is the reason silence is enforced, not to protect us from the truth, but to protect the structures that depend on our ignorance. Yet silence cannot last forever. History is not static. It is alive, restless, and unwilling to remain buried. The earth itself resists forgetting. And when the cycle turns again, as it always does, perhaps the silence will break. Perhaps we will finally face the echoes that call from stone, from sand, from shadow, and from the deep. Perhaps then we will understand that we were never meant to be the final word in the story of this world. We are only the latest chapter. And like the chapters before us, we too will one day be erased, leaving behind fragments for the next to discover. The silence of history is a warning, a reminder, and perhaps an invitation. If we dare to listen, if we dare to look beyond the curated story, we may glimpse a truth that is both terrifying and liberating. A truth that tells us we are not alone, we are not first, and we are not in control. The question is not whether history has been silenced. The question is, for how long, and when the silence finally ends. Will we be ready to hear what speaks back?